The Wild Wood from Kenneth Grahame's The Wind in the Willows. There were times after a day on the river when Rene would talk about his friends, especially Toad and the Badger. "I know Mr. Toad, of course," Mole said, as they talked one evening. "But I don't know Mr. Badger." "Badger lives in the Wild Wood," Rene said. "We certainly don't want to go visiting him there." But Mole couldn't stop thinking about Badger. And one morning, when Rene had gone fishing, he set out for the Wild Wood. It was cold and winter day, and Mole, in high spirits, was glad of his warm scarf. Once inside the wood, however, his spirits fell, for it seemed the place was full of little pointy faces watching him. Suddenly, a big rabbit sped past, muttering, "Danger! Danger! Everywhere! Get out!" "What danger?" Mole asked himself, all at once very much afraid. Meanwhile, Rene had come home. He did not miss his friends for some time, but as the day wore on, he grew anxious. "Where can he be?" he asked himself over and over again. It was only when he went to look outside that he was suddenly aware, for the first time, of Mole's tracks. "I do believe he has set out for Wild Wood after all," he exclaimed in dismay. What a foolish Mole! Rat was too stout-hearted to desert his friend. He went back into the house, put on his warmest clothes, and armed himself to the teeth. Then he set out for the Wild Wood. Once in the Wild Wood, Rene began his search. Up and down he tramped, sometimes calling in a soft voice, "Molly, Molly, where are you?" Every now and then Rat caught glimpses of evil little faces peering at him from behind trees, but he kept on bravely. And at last, after an hour's search, he heard a feeble little cry. "Is that you, Rene? I'm here." The cry came from a hollow at the foot of one of the trees, and Rene bent down and looked inside. There was Mole, shivering and shaking and looking so scared that Rene said, "Now pull yourself together, Molly. We must get going out of here." "I'm sorry, Rene," Mole whispered. "I can't go yet. I'm so tired, and now that you have found me, I feel like a little sleep." And he put his head down, and to Rene's dismay began to snore. It was snowing hard when Mole was fit enough to walk, and it was only by the greatest good luck that Rene found the doormat, and Mole tripped over the door scraper and hurt his leg. "Never mind your leg," Rene exclaimed unkindly. "This doormat and that scraper you are sitting on tell me that somewhere under his bank of snow is Badger's house." Rene and Mole set to work on the snow bank, and presently they came upon a solid little green door beside it, a brass plate which read, "Mr. Badger." "You hang on to the bell pull," Rat said. "I'll hammer on the door." Mole swung on the bell pull while Rene hammered on the door. After a time there was a slow, sloughing sound, then the noise of a plot being drawn. The door opened, and there was old Mr. Badger, a lighted candle in his hand. "Do let us in, Badger," Rene cried. "We are lost, and it's so cold." "Come in, both of you," said Badger in a deep, kindly voice. "The kitchen is a place for you, and I have plenty of food." Badger found them dressing gowns and slippers and sat them down at table laden with delicious food. "Made the sausage rolls myself this very afternoon," said Badger. "And there are plenty of apples, very tasty vegetable pie, though I do say so myself." Ratty and Mole looked at each other and smiled. The wild wood seemed miles away. After really wonderful supper, the water rat told Mr. Badger how he had come to meet Mole. And then Mole told Badger how he came to be in the wild wood. "I was looking for you," he said, smiling. Mr. Badger looked pleased, and when he finally took Ratty and Mole into his storeroom where he kept his spare beds, he was particularly gracious to Mole. Rat and Mole slept very well, and in the morning when they came into breakfast, they both had a good appetites. They shared the meal with two young hedgehogs who had called to see Badger, knowing he would give them a good breakfast. Otter was another unexpected visitor. "So there you both are," he cried, bursting into the room. "I tell you, we were all worried about you. Some of us searched the river bank. I said I would come here." Soon after the two hedgehogs had gone home, Mr. Badger invited Mole, Ratty, and Otter to stay to lunch. Lunch was very enjoyable, and Mole was so clearly pleased at being with Mr. Badger that the kindly fellow offered to take Mole all over his house. Mole was delighted, and his new friend lit a lantern and gave him a conducted tour through the long, dark passages and down the steep walkways which led into a number of different storerooms. When they got back, Ratty was impatient to be off. "We don't want to be spending another night in the wild wood," he said. "Come on, Molly, get your coat on. You can visit Mr. Badger another time." "I'm coming too," said Otter. "I know this wood. I'll lead the way." After their adventure in the wild wood, the weather changed and the snow disappeared. Mole had been staying with Ratty so long that he scarcely ever thought of his home. There were so many pleasant and exciting things to do that Mole had very little time to himself to think about his whole life. But all this was to change. One day he was out with Ratty. They had been for a very long walk and been much further than usual. "You know," said Mole, stopping suddenly in his tracks, "there's something very familiar about this place. I seem to have been here before." And he sniffed the air. But Ratty paid no attention and strode forward anxiously to be home again. Mole trotted after his friend. His little face wore such an anxious, troubled look that Ratty couldn't help noticing it when they stopped. "Sit down here," he said in a kindly way, "and tell me what's wrong." It's just something that about the place reminds me of home," Mole whispered, beginning to sob. "But you wouldn't stop." "Well now," said Ratty, "what a cruel fellow you must take me for. I'm afraid I was thinking too much about our supper. Cheer up, Mole. We'll turn back at once." And he took Mole's paw. Mole cheered up as they hurried along. Then he began to sniff the air and look about him with great excitement. "What is it, old boy?" Ratty asked at last. "Where we are going?" "Home," gasped Mole, his little eyes bright. "I do believe I have stumbled on my own home, my own dear home." He had scarcely stopped speaking when he took a dive through a hedge. Ratty followed, not without difficulty, and was just in time to see him dart into a tunnel. The tunnel had a queer, earthy smell and very dark, but at the end of it, Rat saw that they were standing in an open space. Mole took a lantern from a nail in the wall and struck a match, and there it was, the front door of his house. "There it is," said Mole. "We are home." Ratty couldn't help thinking how cold and damp everything was once they were inside. But he said nothing. Instead, he brushed himself collecting bits of wood that were lying around and built a fire. Mole no longer looked excited, but when he saw his friend hard at work making a fire, he began to look more cheerful. He found a duster and began dusting the chairs and table. I had forgotten how long I have been away," he said as he dusted. "I used to be so proud of my little home, kept everything neat and tidy." "I can see that," Reddy said kindly. "We'll have the place shipshape in no time at all." "Of course we will," said Mole. But Mole didn't stay cheerful for very long. He began to feel hungry. "We haven't anything for supper, Ratty," he said. "I feel so ashamed." "We don't know yet," said Ratty, who was also feeling hungry. "Let's explore the cupboards. You never know." To Mole's delight, they found quite a few things they could eat. The tins of sardines were excellent, and so was the German sausage, also in a tin. Then there were the bottles of ginger pop and the box of dry biscuits. They just started on their second tin of sardines when there was a scuffling of small feet outside. "We have got visitors," Mole exclaimed, and then came round sound of singing. "I think it must be the carol singers. They always used to come to my house. Last fall I would give them hot drinks. Let's have them in." Ratty cried, and he ran to the door. The field mice carol singers made a merry sight as they trooped in and formed a circle. "Now then, boys," said their conductor, lifting his baton. Mole didn't seem to enjoy the lovely carols. "I'm sorry, Ratty," he whispered at last. "I'm so worried. We haven't a thing to give them." Ratty said nothing, but presently he spoke to the conductor. "Be a good lad," he said in a low voice. "Take this money and buy as much as you can. Fill the basket with things to eat and drink. There's a shop in the village which stays open all hours," said the conductor. "I'll be as quick as I can, sir." And he hurried off, swinging the basket. After the mice had sung one or two of Ratty's favorite carol, he told them all to sit on Mole's big seat. It was tight squeeze, and there was a lot of pushing and giggling. There was still enough ginger pop to fill their mugs, and they looked very happy and content, especially when Ratty said that each one could recite his best poem if he wanted to. By the time 2 or 3 of the mice had given recitations, their conductor was back, and my, what a feast they had! Mole's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he saw all the goodies spread out on the table. It was a splendid sight. After the feast, Mole and Ratty joined in some of the party games, and then it was time for the happy little mice to go home. Mole and Ratty stood in the doorway to wave them goodbye. "Goodbye, goodbye," they called back, "and thank you again." Mole sighed with happiness. "It's all thanks to you, Ratty," he said at last. The house felt strangely quiet after the carol singers had gone, but Mole didn't mind. He sat with Ratty before this his very own fire, feeling very content with life. Ratty understood what Mole was thinking. "It's like this, old fellow," he said. "East-west, home is the best." "That's true," said Mole, "but don't imagine I want to live here all the time. If you don't mind, Ratty, I would just like to come home sometimes." "That's settled then," said Ratty as Mole took out clean patchwork quills. "You will come home with me tomorrow, but you will come back here whenever you feel like it." Mole nodded happily as he climbed into bed. What a wonderful friend Ratty was, and how well the day had turned out after all. And Ratty, as he closed his eyes, was thinking much the same about Mole. Soon there wasn't a sound to be heard except for Mole's soft little snuffling snores.